Good morning, everyone. My name is Ann Berry. I'm the Deputy Commissioner with the Minnesota Department of Human Services, and we're here today to talk about the Jensen settlement and start our first phase of training to provide everybody with the background, very basic background about the settlement, some of the resources that are available to you, and we're going to leave plenty of time for questions because we know people have lots of questions. So let's go ahead and get started. Some organizing things first. The PowerPoint that you're seeing on your screen can also be found at this site. I'll give you just a second or two if you want to write it down there so that you can. It's also http://tinyurl.com/ J Jensen OCT capital OCT 2014. And you can also submit questions during this video conference to the email listed here, Jensen capital J settlement capital S .dhs@state.mn.us. Now, if you still can't get to the PowerPoint, you can send an email to this address and we can shoot out the PowerPoint to you. It may take a couple seconds if a lot of you send requests for the PowerPoint. We'll do our best to keep up with any requests we might get. Great, so hopefully people have the materials in front of them or have access to them, and we can go ahead and get started. So let's start with a little bit of background about the Jensen settlement. People talk about the settlement agreement, but this is the result of a class action lawsuit that was brought by plaintiffs in July of 2009. The allegation against the department was that residents at the program, at the Extended Treatment Options Program in Minnesota, were secluded and restrained inappropriately. And then rather than a trial, the department agreed to enter into a settlement discussion and ultimately agreement that was adopted by the court in December of 2011. We are nearing December of 2014, so we are almost 3 years past the date that we entered into that settlement agreement with the plaintiffs and was approved by the court. In 2012, with some concerns that the department wasn't moving with great enough urgency to adopt the requirements of the settlement agreement, the court appointed a court monitor. His name is David Furliger. We get requests from David frequently. We get reports from David. David has consultants that are available to him. You may see him out and about in Minnesota in the coming months and in the coming year, but he has a rather substantial responsibility to the court, which is to monitor our progress toward reaching the requirements and all the things that the department committed to in the settlement, and reporting back to the court on whether the department is in substantial compliance or not with the settlement agreement. Another thing that you'll hear us talk about in addition to the settlement is the comprehensive plan of action. That comprehensive plan of action is a rather large document that puts in place all of the things that we committed to, all of the things that we agreed to do under the settlement agreement. It's really broken into 3 parts. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But we established this in August of 2013. Again, the concern was that the department wasn't moving with great enough urgency, nor communicating its responsibilities under the plan. So the court required that we very specifically lay out all the things we were going to do with timelines, with persons responsible for achieving the things that we said we would achieve under the comprehensive plan or under the Jensen settlement. Just one other point I want to make here is that there is a Jensen implementation team. That team is responsible for the management of this plan. There are a lot of people in the department, though, that are contributing toward meeting the requirements of the comprehensive plan of action. With me today is Peg Booth. You'll see her and get to hear from her in a few minutes. Again, I want to leave plenty of time for questions because I know people have them. But we knew we had to have an implementation team inside the agency. Peg Booth is leading up that office. She has a team who works with her. But it would be an understatement, or it wouldn't be an accurate representation of all the effort just to say that the Jensen implementation team is involved. This is a responsibility of the Department of Human Services and the human services system in this state, which clearly includes counties and tribes, all those who are providers in this system. And the Comprehensive Plan of Action and the court contemplate that it is the entire human services system that is responsible for carrying out the requirements of the settlement. So I said there were parts to the settlement agreement. There are 3 parts to the settlement agreement. Part 1 addresses closing MEDO, creating successor facilities, and making sure that treatment is available in communities to deal with clients people who would have otherwise gone to MEDO or to the program at Cambridge. Part 2 of the Comprehensive Plan of Action addresses the modernization of Rule 40, and finally Part 3 addresses the Minnesota Olmstead Plan. So let's take these one at a time. Part 1 required the closure of the Extended Treatment Options Program and ultimately the closure of the program in Cambridge. We closed MEDO in June of 2011, and now we've just closed the Cambridge campus in August of 2014. The closure of Cambridge was also paired with the development and creation of what we call successor facilities, or new facilities that are community-based to provide treatment to people in a way that recognizes smaller environments can be more therapeutic environments for people, and they're not supposed to be permanent residences. They really are for treatment of clients who have lost their home, lost their placement in the community. They need a transition and they need treatment. We all need to do a little bit of work so that people can successfully live in the community. It is our goal as an agency, and I hope it's our goal collectively, that we want to avoid people losing placement. So we also will talk a little bit in a few minutes about getting way upstream. How the department and all of us can collectively deploy and use resources so that people don't have to make their way to lose their place in a community or in a home and make their way to one of our programs, but we have them there for the very specific purpose that, or for the reality and practicality that people do lose placements and do need a place for treatment. We will also be developing more homes. The court has asked that we do an assessment. We would do that with you. We, as I said, just have 2 homes now. But right now we're looking for to add a home in Northeast Minnesota and another one in the South or West Metro area. I don't think that's the end of our development. I think what we're hearing back from counties, from families, from providers, from others is that we need additional capacity, and we want to be responsive to that. So part 2 of the Comprehensive Plan of Action is the modernization of Rule 40. I'm assuming that many people are aware of the effort that is underway. We are currently in listening sessions to look at the first draft of the rule. There's a long administrative process involved here before it goes to the Office of Administrative Hearings, before a hearing judge. But so there's a lot happening right now around the modernization of Rule 40. But again, just as background, Rule 40 governs the use of aversive and deprivation procedures in licensed facilities that serve people who are developmentally disabled. The shift here is the new rule will really focus on positive behavioral supports. So it's a positive support rule that is yet to be named or numbered. That'll happen later in the process. But it really is is directed at home and community-based service providers. Some of these provisions are already in statute and have been for the last 18 months or 2 years. This also incorporates these requirements for anyone who is developmentally disabled and in a facility or program licensed by the commissioner. A very, very broad application for persons with developmental disabilities, either served in a licensed facility by the commissioner, and then for all providers of home and community-based services. So again, as I said, lots of work going on here, listening sessions taking place, and you have a lot of opportunity to provide input to the rule. It's in its draft stage right now, and we'll be spending weeks getting the draft to a final stage so it can move further along in the process. So that's part 2 of the Comprehensive Plan of Action. Part 3 is the Olmstead Plan. As a part of the settlement agreement, we agreed to develop an Olmstead Plan. Minnesota was one of the states that didn't have a written document that represented the entirety of an Olmstead Plan. Most states have or had an Olmstead Plan. Minnesota now has an Olmstead Plan. We're going to do a little technical work here. Okay, so there are really 2 phases to this work. In March of 2012, the department formed an Olmstead Committee, which made a series of recommendations to the commissioner about how to shape or create an Olmstead Plan. And then in January of 2013, Governor Dayton issued an executive order that required agency participation in a sub-cabinet that would be formed to draft and finalize an Olmstead Plan under the Jensen settlement. Now, this sub-cabinet, or this group of people as part of the executive order, also includes, in addition to agencies of state government, it includes 2 ex officio members, the ombudsman of the office serving people with mental health and developmental disabilities, and then the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. So both Kleenwick and Roberta Opheim serve as ex officio members, and then the sub-cabinet is made up of a number of commissioners across state government, all of whom have an impact and contribute to people living the most integrated life. So one of the most important attributes of an Olmstead Plan, or the Olmstead requirement, is that people, states are responsible to make sure that people can live in the most integrated setting. It means people have choices. It means people have control over and are participants. They are at the center of treatment decisions, transition decisions, and where they live decisions. Where they call home is a part of their choice, is a part of, and we have a responsibility to create that environment so that people can make choices. Those choices aren't endless. We understand that, and we have a lot to do as a state to make sure that we have the capacity so people can make those choices. But at its core, the Olmstead, the Supreme Court decision in Olmstead is a statement about people with disabilities living the most integrated life in their communities. So agencies like transportation, education, human services, health, long list of agencies who have DEED, who has responsibility in the state for jobs and job opportunities, all participate as a part of this sub-cabinet to put together the Olmstead Plan in the detail that was required by the court. Now, I think most people know, sorry, let me go back one step then. The sub-cabinet submitted the Olmstead Plan to the court, I want to say about six weeks to 2 months ago. We were expecting to get approval of the court, but we didn't. We just recently heard from the court that our current plan is not acceptable. Much of the detail there is appreciated and understood, but the court's order demonstrates an urgency toward measurable outcomes. That it's not just enough to say we have these baselines in place, but that you have to demonstrate as a state that people are living more integrated lives. And how are you going to do that? How are you going to measure your success? And it's not enough to just say that we're going to take a baseline measure. We have to actually demonstrate that we are moving people into more integrated environments and into more integrated settings, and that people have choices around where they live, where they work, who their relationships are with, who are they a part of their community or not? So we still have work to do. The subcabinet has gone back to work. They're taking a look at the plan itself, and by November 10th, we need to submit the new plan to the court. All right, so those are the three parts of the comprehensive plan of action: the closure of Meadow and the closure of Cambridge, the modernization of Rule 40, and then the Olmstead Plan. So now let's talk a little bit about Jensen class members. We are launching this training today and launching an initiative which is underway, specifically around Jensen class members. One of the commitments made by the department is that anyone who was at Meadow and subjected to restraints and seclusion in that environment will be considered, is a class member, and will be provided follow-up, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I think that's the core, the heart of what we want to talk about. In addition to class members, there are people who have received treatment at Cambridge. They will all be part of a group that we call the Therapeutic FollowUp group. We're actually calling it the Successful Life Project, but in the Comprehensive Plan of Action, it's called the Therapeutic FollowUp group. And the commissioner made a commitment to the court that because clients who were in our care had been subjected to restraint and seclusion, that we would follow up as long as required on those particular class members because they were subjected to something by the department, and that we had a special duty, a special responsibility to those class members. So, now I don't know if people can read this chart, but hopefully you've got the PowerPoint and you can see county by county the number of people who are in your county. You can see that this is not all 87 counties either. Class members are not spread out into all 87 counties. I think they're in 37.
Yeah, predominantly 37.
About 37 counties. And so you can see here how that spreads out across the state, and about those counties who do have people who are covered under the settlement agreement and are considered part of the Therapeutic Follow-Up group. And you should have also gotten information from us, an email from us, letting you know that you're a county who has class members in your community, and that we will work together to provide communication to providers and follow-up, really, for all of these clients. We're doing this first look at clients so that we can make sure that, in fact, they are living in integrated environments. Sorry, I'm a slide or two behind. So we've notified you of the class members in your county, and provider members is going to happen over the next couple of weeks. I wanted to see if I missed a slide here. Sorry. So the Therapeutic Follow-Up team is going to be looking very specifically at where people are living, what kind of a life they're living, are restraints and seclusions being used, how do they have a job, do they have friends in the community. Our staff, our group of people who are going to go out and look at this first group are going to make a very quick look at just what kind of lives are these people living, so that we can do a more comprehensive an assessment or review down the road. So the comprehensive plan of action really contemplates both things. That we take what I would call a quick look, a quick review, and then do a follow-up. For those of you who saw the community review that was done by David Furliger's consultants, you know that the critique was harsh, that the critique was that we weren't doing enough at the department to assure that people were living in integrated environments, that people had meaningful work, or that they were involved with their communities, or that they had family members or loved ones or anyone other than the staff who were caring for them involved in their lives. So we take on that responsibility. I think we need to collectively take on that responsibility as a human services system in this state to make sure that people with disabilities and especially those who are class members have those are living those kind of lives in the community. Right. Let's see. One other thing I want to mention, and it's the second point in this slide, has to do with the federal changes that are coming under CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicaid Services, Medicaid and Medicare Services. And they have to do with the requirements for home and community-based services. So the class members may serve really as a forerunner for what's going to need to happen in our state for providing services under the waiver, which is more integrated environments, less congregated environments, people get some choices, and that integration in life really means in all parts of people's lives. It's again, where people work, maybe where they practice their religion, do they have people in their lives other than staff that they work with? So those are all things that CMS will be looking for as well, and of course they are the payer of service, and if those will all be important changes for us as well. So these are the things that we have provided for as entitlements for class members that are identified in the Comprehensive Plan of Action. So every class member will have a person-centered plan. They will have a positive behavioral support plan. A functional behavioral assessment has been done. On these plans, I've already talked about the most integrated setting and how that gets defined under the Olmstead Plan. And then finally, they're also entitled to therapeutic follow-up. So we're also putting together a statewide training and communication action plan. This is the first phase of that training, and so I'm going to tell you this later again, but I'll say it now. We need your feedback. We need to hear what you need from us, but we know this is a large shift in the service delivery system in our state, and just the simple requirement that people get choices about where they live in the community changes the dynamic in our system today. We currently slot people. There's a facility open here or a placement here. We'll move that person to that place. And I understand that system. I've been a part of that system for all the years that system was developed and created. But we're expected to do something else today by not just the court, but by CMS, and I think by the public, and particularly people living with disabilities, that they have an expectation that they will have some choices about where they live. So this is the kickoff again, and we're really trying to zero in on class members, but at the same time, this has ramifications for the entire system, or our collective responsibility across the state. All right, my slides aren't changing here.
Gotcha.
You should be good now.
All right. So this is part of phase one, but over the next 6 to 9 months, we're going to develop training and information that is targeted at you as lead agencies and providers currently serving the Jensen class members. Again, hoping that training and the work we're doing will prepare you then for phase 2 and 3, which are really to broaden that training and communication so that communities and the public all are aware of our responsibilities under the Comprehensive Plan of Action, but also under the Olmstead Plan, under the Olmstead requirements. Also included here are legislators and policymakers and governors and county commissioners and others who will be responsible for making decisions that resource a system that looks slightly different, not slightly different, but looks different than the system we have today. So phase 1 and 2 of the training plan, we're just in the initial stages. Today is just an opening opportunity for us. And then what we need from you is an analysis of, well, what training do you need? We don't know about positive behavioral supports, and we'll give you some resources later in this presentation. We don't know what a functional behavioral assessment is. We don't know what these things are. We need we need assistance, technical assistance, we need more training, we need staff, we need expertise, whatever it is, we need to know what you need, all right? And then we can start to develop materials and strategies for delivering training in a way that meets your needs and the needs of the people we serve. So this is one of those supports, technical assistance, resources for you, the College of Direct Supports. They have been working with the Department of Human Services to create an online training that's to people with disabilities and their families. They have a core curriculum around person-centered planning and behavior supports. These will become the basis, I think, can serve as the basis for the kinds of training that we'll be doing across the state. But people other than the department have been working on the development of these training materials. So I don't think it's that we're creating something from whole cloth, that in fact some of these resources and these trainings exist. So DHS offers the College of Direct Support to providers, and then you can also see here's the information on where you can find information on the College of Direct Support and their website. There's also a place at the University of Minnesota that's called the Institute of Community Integration, ICI, and they're doing training around person-centered thinking, person-centered planning, and ICI is scheduled to do a number of those trainings from now and through the end of the year. I know that in our own programs in direct care and treatment, we've been providing person-centered training to all of our staff. In one of our programs, a condition of our license is that everybody in the program at Security Hospital, for example, be trained in person-centered thinking. So again, trying to push resources across all of our programs in DHS, but also across all the state to providers, you as county, as lead agencies, tribes when they're the lead agency, so that people understand what we mean by being person-centered, taking person-centered approaches, and having a person-centered plan. Again, there's a website there for you at the University of Minnesota, so you can see where that training is made available, and again, working together to find other ways for us to deliver person-centered training across the state. Again, these last slides really are additional resources. This is where you can find the settlement and the comprehensive plan of action. If you would like to look at the entire detail behind the plan, there's a lot of it there. We can also help you navigate that. There's also some Jensen settlement training that we did inside the agency, and these have all been moved to YouTube, so you should be able to get to them. It's a presentation by Commissioner Jensen, one by the Lieutenant Governor, and then one by David Furliger. I said it's one we used internally. We were ordered by the court. All 7,000 employees of the Department of Human Services were required to take this training, and we accomplished that in the 30 days where we were given to deliver this training to all of our staff inside the agency. So again, more resources for you about the settlement. And then finally, next steps. In the next couple of weeks, there'll be a survey. We need your feedback. How did we do today? What else do you need? And if you're interested in participating and working with us on developing more training curriculums, what other informational materials you need, and then work together with us on strategies for delivering training. We don't have to do this all by video setup. I know there's other ways. Institutions of higher learning and others, even high schools, have figured out how to deliver online training, real-time training. Work with us to help us develop some of those strategies. That would be very helpful. And then, if you have questions, you can email Peg. She's sitting right next to me, and she already handed me a couple. So you have been asking questions throughout this presentation, and the next half hour or so will be spent in responding to those questions that you've sent. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So one of the questions we got was, why are the same staff still working at Bridges that were working at Meadow? So the requirement to close Meadow wasn't just about staff or staff interactions. It was the way the department looked at this and the way the court looked at this was there was a system or an environment that allowed for leadership to put together plans for people that didn't recognize really positive behavioral supports. So all of our staff have been trained, as I said, in person-centered thinking, person-centered approaches. It's in position descriptions. It's our expectation of staff. So we have staff that were working at Meadow that are still working in other facilities across the state, not just in Bridges, which I'm not as familiar with, but in other programs. And I think that leadership takes the responsibility for what happened at Meadow, and I think that staff fully understand and now understand their responsibility for raising issues when they see them. So again, not to blame any individual for what happened at the Meadow program. I don't think that would be appropriate, but I think leadership needed to and has continued to take responsibility for what happened, and it's our ongoing responsibility as well. Great question. The second question is, are you going to do development in other areas so people can stay in their home rather than moving to the metro or, I think it says northeast Minnesota? Is that right? Well, I guess we can say that about any particular geography in the state, right? We don't want people to have to move to the metro area, right? That's not where everybody calls home. That's not where their support is. That's not where they're going to find work. So, yes, we will be doing more therapeutic the treatment home development in other parts of the state. I think I said that in one of the slides. We're looking at the northeast part of the state, south and metro. I think we want to look in the northwest corner, the southwest corner, southern Minnesota. Again, looking at what kind of capacity we have across our entire system. And that's a great question. If you think there's a need in the specific part of the state, we want to know about it. And you can contact Peg. She will make sure that she's in touch with the right people who are developing the programs across the state. There again is Peg's email. Let us know. The next question is, what can be done when the positive support plan is not enough? I'm not sure I completely understand the question the way it's written, but I think I understand the question. Which is we have a responsibility then to figure out what does work, right? To always what's important to and important for the people we're serving. Those are tools that we use in person-centered approaches. So it doesn't mean people get to do whatever they want to do. It means we have to find what's important to them and not get into power struggles with people, but also none of us gets to do anything we want to do. So it's all about balancing those things. So if a positive behavioral support plan isn't working, it's not working and it has to be redone. We need to take another look at why it's not working. Is it not working because we didn't hit the mark the first time or the second time, or because we didn't get to the right things that really were important to someone, or we didn't make it clear to the people we're serving what's really important for them? If they want to work or if they want to live in the community, something broke down, something fell apart. So I would say that, thank you, that we need to make sure that positive behavioral support plans really are working. Now, I'm reminded, and this is really, really, really important for people to understand, there's nothing in the settlement agreement with the court or our responsibility to the court monitor that says that in emergencies we can't use manual restraint. And there are going to be times when we need to. I think that's really, really important for people to understand that when there's an imminent threat of harm to self or others and nothing else is working, there's no less restrictive way to keep people safe or to keep the people who are caring for them safe. We can use the emergency use of manual restraints, and when appropriate, local law enforcement can be called as well. And it happens. It happens in all of our facilities. It happens in other facilities. It happens in real life to all people, right? That's That's what happens in society, that people go beyond the boundaries, and they've forgotten about what is important for their living among everybody in society, right? And so there are boundaries. When we need to use manual restraint because we find ourselves in an emergency or something that's so dangerous to the client or to others, we can use it. Now, we can't continually use it. We can't use it forever. Then it's no longer the emergency use of manual restraint. But there's a balance there, and we don't expect people, again, to just let people do whatever it is they want to do. But it's really in striking that balance that is so important. And it means really, really engaging people and getting to know somebody in such a way that you understand. Understand them, and they understand you and the people they're working with so well that we all have real integrity, and I guess the word that our clinicians use is fidelity to the plan that has been laid out for people as they live their integrated lives. So thank you for that reminder, staff. Other questions?
I think from the live video.
Okay, so we can also do questions on live video. Are there questions? All you have to do is unmute and speak up, and we'll hear it.
I have another one here.
Peg's working on another one. Looks like a long question.
I have this one. I have another one.
Okay.
That's
What do you suggest when the provider wants clients to move or will issue a demit notice because the neighbors complain about threatening to call the police? Well, there's a couple things I think you can do. We can do. One is we can deploy staff to a home or to a facility so that people feel like they're getting advice, and not only advice and consultation, but actually working with clients and working with staff. Sometimes there comes a point where staff are just so exhausted and they've tried everything and nothing's working, and people throw up their hands. I think everybody understands that you get to that point that you're just out of ideas, out of suggestions. Even before you get there, use us. Use the resources of the department. We are working on a single point of entry into when there is a crisis, when there is an issue, how you reach us. We know that the department isn't currently organized well enough for you to know exactly where to go. Well, one of the things that we think we can do for you as counties and providers is to make it easy for you to get that help, to get that technical assistance you need, and do a triage. So it may be something more complicated, or it may be something a little more simple and easier to handle. Either way, there's also some work we all need to do in helping neighbors understand that we all live in neighborhoods. We all have probably neighbors who make complaints, right? That people with disabilities are no different than anybody who lives in a neighborhood. And I think that it's really important for us to communicate that to the public, and we have a big responsibility here. And then again, there's boundaries to that. Our clients can't walk into, or people we serve can't walk into other people's houses. That's something none of us can do, right? So I think it's being, applying some common sense, and also working closely with you and with providers to see if we can't save a living arrangement that somebody has had for a long period of time because something went wrong. So use us as a resource, and our commitment to you is to provide a single place where you can get that help. Our job is to do all the behind-the-scene work to figure out how to get you what you need to get done, but to make it easy for you to reach us for help. We know that that we're already seeing orders to be demitted, and we've one at a time been dealing with providers and communities, taking all the resources that we have at the department, to maybe do another functional behavioral assessment, to do another positive behavioral support plan, to actually have staff working side by side with others in the facility. There's a number of different things we can do to try and keep someone living where they're living. And then sometimes it doesn't work, and we have to find another solution. That happens. Which leads to the next question. How long can an individual live in one of the two Minnesota Life Bridge homes? Great question. I don't think there's any specified time period. It's a treatment facility, so we know it takes some time. We've had varying lengths of stay. We told the court that our target is no longer than 90 days. We do have some clients that have actually exceeded that, but that's really our target, is no more than that. But if somebody doesn't need 90 days to make that adjustment and transition back to the community, we shouldn't use 90 days. I don't have probably as definitive an answer as people would like, but it's really based on the client that has gone there. But I would start by saying our target date to the court was we would like to treat and transition people back to the community within 90 days. So the next question, when will providers be notified of the names of class members? That's going to be happening. Counties, you'll be taking on that responsibilities to contact them. You've been made aware of the class members in your communities or in your counties. And that's part of the instructions that went to you. If you need help with that, or if you need information about that, you can certainly call Peg if there's any question about what am I responsible for. But that was the email that went, that first came, I think, from me to the counties, and then it was followed up by John Dinsmore. He's our county liaison. He followed up with another message to you. And so in the next couple of weeks, we're expecting counties to contact providers who have class members in their facilities. Are there positive behavioral support experts available? Yes, there are. We have a number of them inside of the agency. The team that's being built out of Minnesota Life Bridge, the Successful Life Project, will have a number of people with expertise in positive behavioral supports. Our Disability Services Division has a number of people who are experts in positive behavioral supports. We don't have enough. I think most people would say that we need more, and we are developing and searching for more, and we're in the process of hiring more people to work on the Minnesota Life Bridge deployment team. But yes, we do have expertise inside the agency who can be made available to those who need to learn more about positive behavioral supports, can do a positive behavioral support plan, who can help you develop one, whatever it is that needs to happen at the community level.
I'll answer one question that came in because it's hard to answer to write it all down. We received a question about the college's direct supports and that it's very expensive. And in fact, it's not. Disability Services purchased rights for Minnesota to the college direct supports, and it's a very nominal cost. If you go to the website, it will provide you with some of the information on the cost. If you're a very small agency, it can possibly be no cost. So do go to the website to find that information.
Thanks, Beck. Great.
Another question is Life Bridge available to children?
Do you want me to take that?
Sure.
Sure.
We also have Steve Jensen with us here today, who is the director of Life Bridge.
We have supported some children, adolescents, older adolescents, probably 15, 16, 17 years old. Generally, we are not licensed to have them in the treatment homes, but we've done diversion work and worked with other parts of the direct care treatment system where children are. So indirectly, we're able to work with children in those ways. I think as part of our development, we are going to look at probably having at least a couple of treatment places where we can serve kids.
Okay. That's a great question, and I think part of that responsibility we have to assess the needs you have. If that's a specific need, right now, in direct care and treatment, one of the few places where we do serve children is at the program in Wilmer, the CABS program in Wilmer, and the Child and Adolescent Behavior Health Services. And the report that was released by the Policy Division in Chemical and Mental Health Services just, I want to say 6 weeks ago, recognized that we need more treatment services for children with disabilities, children with mental health issues specifically. So that's an important question, and thank you, Steve, for responding.
The question is, how do we reach out to those individuals with positive behavior support experts? Is there a contact list?
Oh, great. Do you want to? Well, this is the commitment I just talked about a moment ago, that we're working internally. So the next communication that I think will go out to counties will be that point of contact where we would do the triage. And I'm glad people are raising that question today, because it provides a greater urgency for us to get it done, so that you have that single point of contact. Right now, if you'd contact Peg Booth, who you've seen and whose email is up here and easy for you to reach, and you can let her know that we need support in positive behavioral supports. The important thing for us to distinguish is the difference between community capacity building or system capacity building, which would be addressed out of Disability Services Division, or if you really need treatment. If you need a treatment team person who's going to come in and actually work with staff and touch the people we serve or are being served in the community, then we'll use the Minnesota Life Bridge team. But you shouldn't have to figure that out. We should be the ones responsible for figuring that out. So for right now, if you contact PEG because you need somebody with expertise in positive behavioral supports, we will do that internal triage, and then we'll also get out to you a single point of contact.
We have another question about what is the role of MSOCs in providing housing?
Well, MSOCs, as you know, Minnesota State operated, community operated services, is evolving and is changing, and one of the recommendations that came out of the Office of the Legislative Auditor is that we really focus on being the safety net for state services, that many of the clients we currently serve today could be served by private providers. But we also know that there's a place for our MSOCs programs, and we see ourselves more and more serving those clients that currently aren't being served in the community. We've been opening more forensic homes, so people who are leaving our programs from Security Hospital. There's a number of them across the state. We see real opportunities to redeploy and reuse many of those programs for other populations that need a more secure environment in the community, and that, again, playing more of a safety net role. We also have crisis homes in community-based services, and we also need to be all collectively, including MSOCs, more nimble at single person housing, whether it's an apartment or it's a townhouse, it's scattered site housing. We've moved from large institutional environments to now mini congregated environments, and this is the next phase. No one's suggesting that the smaller environments, the smaller adult foster care environments, the smaller home environments weren't an improvement over large congregated environments where thousands of people lived. I mean, clearly Minnesota was on the right path, and we're going to continue on that path so that people have more choices. And all of us, and including private providers who have begun to do this already. I don't want to suggest that nobody's doing this. We're just going to need to do more of single living arrangements. Not all, I say this all the time, not all of us live with 3 unrelated adults in the same house. Not all of us are built to do that or would tolerate that. I think that's true of everyone. So making sure that people have choices is one of our next responsibilities. And MSOCs will still be part of that delivery system. Has been, will be, maybe serving a population that currently isn't served in the community today.
The other part of this question was, what is the flexibility of the rate methodology system to find the really expensive cases? I guess they're looking at how working with disability services on the funding, and disability services does actively work with providers and with the counties for individuals that may have some high costs, looking at those cost drivers. So there is a process in place for rate exceptions, and it's really working with disability services.
I agree with Peg that Disability Services Division has been great in working with providers and working with MSOCs on those rate exceptions and looking on a person-by-person and county-by-county basis, because the resource allocation across the state is different, and the mix of people who are moving into community looks different across the state. So there shouldn't be a single answer to this question, but I know from our own personal experience in direct care and treatment that DSD, Disability Services Division, has been extremely responsive around here's what this person needs, and their response being, and here's what the waiver can pay for, here's the county allocation, let's work with the county to figure out how to make this work for people to move into the community.
Well, I'm not seeing any more questions. There's a few questions that I'll respond that was very case specific. But if you do have questions, please email me directly or use the Jensen mailbox, and I'll try to get a response back to you very quickly. We know you have lots of questions, and sometimes you just need to think about them for a while.
We also want to make sure that in addition to the information we shared at the start of the video around where not only where you find the PowerPoint, but how you get other information, we also want to make sure you get credit for this training session. So if Peggy, you want to take a minute just to make sure people know how to make sure they get the credit that they have earned for listening and asking questions and participating?
For those of you that are attending at a video conference live site, there should be a sign-in sheet that was provided to you, and a person was identified at each of those sites to collect them and to email them or fax them to the DSD Learn box. So please be sure to register that you've attended. For those of you that are attending through live streaming, we will be sending out a survey, and we'll be asking you if you did attend. It's rather hard to sort of get you to do a sign-in sheet. So, and again, regarding the survey, we really need your feedback. We don't say we have all the answers, and we're really looking for partnerships with counties and providers to help us figure out what's needed.
Well, great. As Peg said, please let us know what your questions are. Please follow up with us. We're here to be responsive to your questions, to understand what your training needs are. Hopefully I've made clear what our responsibilities are under the Jensen settlement, that we have that responsibility collectively as a human services system. The federal court in this case fully expects us to work collectively and cooperatively to make sure that people with disabilities live in the most integrated environment. I know the kind of stress that you are under, we are under as well. I also know what it feels like to get the harsh critiques from the court monitor, and to get requests that we need to respond to in 15 or 30 days. We will do our best when we get those responses when we get those requests from the court monitor, to get them to you as quickly as we can so that you can be responsive as well. And I wish I could guarantee you that you will get all the time you need to be responsive, but I can't because we don't. So again, I understand. I appreciate the stress and sort of the frustration and the feeling like we've done nothing right. Well, that's far from the truth. There are many, many things that we have done right, and a change system in Minnesota that 15 years ago moved away from a highly institutionalized environment to one that is much more community-based. What the court and the monitor are doing are pushing us even further, and together, I think. Inside this human services system, or as a part of this human services system in Minnesota, that we will do our best to serve people with disabilities in the most integrated way we can. So I want to thank you for your participation today, for listening, for asking questions when you had them, and again, thinking of us as a resource as you run into more questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.